It's time for Lefties Losing It. It's predictable, but I have more CNN nincompoopery. Yes, that is a word, look it up. Or just watch CNN because you'll be overwhelmed by nincompoops indulging in endless nincompoopery. I'll be bringing you CNN anchor Caitlin Collins being comprehensively owned soon. But first, let's look at the aftermath and CNN host Dana Bash claiming that it's misinformation to say that CNN is anti-America.
Say, for the record, since we heard President Trump say in the Oval Office that CNN hates our country, CNN does not hate our country. That should go without saying.
Oh, really, Dana? Let's go to the tape. I could play hours of footage of CNN hating on America, but here's just 30 seconds of CNN being anti-American miscreants.
Here's a breaking news. We live in a racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic country.
Everything they're doing runs against making America great.
Well,
it was never great, so I'm not going to say the again part, but making America great.
Kicking off the Independence Day weekend, President Trump will be at Mount Rushmore, where he'll be standing in front of a monument of two slave owners and on land wrestled away from Native Americans, told that be focusing on the effort to, quote, tear down our country's history.
Now to what sparked this latest CNN outrage. Earlier today, Caitlin Collins was again advocating on behalf of a gangbanger from El Salvador who was deported to El Salvador. Apparently that is a massive mistake that needs to be corrected. Listen here to how President Trump introduces Caitlin Collins.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
A MS-13 gangbanger in the country illegally. Apparently it's a massive mistake to deport him. Now, President Trump called on the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to respond to the question, and then Stephen Miller. Even Mark Rubio chipped in. Mic drop after mic drop. This was glorious.
First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country.
President Trump then called on senior advisor Stephen Miller to weigh in, given CNN is obsessed with this case.
As you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant. Because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. That neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan to ask for him to get him back?
Yep, even after all of that, Caitlin wants to know if Trump is going to ask the gangbanger be returned to America.
Well,
no version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked President Bukele, can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to have suggested that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States?
Yes, it is preposterous, President Bukele. No one would expect you to smuggle a terrorist into the United States, other than CNN, of course.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin.
I give up. Even the Secretary of State weighing in wasn't enough for CNN.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility.
Like I said, nincompoopery, weapon grade nincompoopery. Let's bring in Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, why do the American left, CNN, the Democrats, keep pushing on this issue where Donald Trump enjoys overwhelming support? The American people, and the polling shows this, support the deportation program. They want these gangbangers in particular out of the country. We're talking about the worst of the worst here. We're not just talking about people in the country illegally. Someone who was found to be an MS-13 gang member, and they won't let it go.
It really is fascinating. It feels like it's a dysfunctional robot. Like the way she was asking the same questions in the software update just didn't happen. And it's kind of no matter who said it, and all the heavy hitters in the administration, one after the other, were coming, and it's going back to that same talking point. I think also since they're so much losing in the big picture of this issue, it's actually fascinating how much public support has shifted in a relatively short period of time to deporting all illegals, not only the violent ones, and they still do this. So when they've lost the big picture, they like to go into minutia. And they've had a couple of small wins along the way in this particular case, where one court said that he can be deported, but not to El Salvador, even though that's his home country, because he claimed persecution or whatever it is. That's still working its way up the court, but in the interim, they got a little bit of a win. And that's why I think CNN is just latching on to that one little detail and forgoing the big picture and the fact that they're really outside of where the American population is.
But even on a micro level with this particular case, you've got someone who's in the country illegally, they're from El Salvador, they're being deported to El Salvador, and somehow this is the one case that they want to highlight to show why this program is flawed. It's absolutely mad. On El Salvador, President Bukele, extraordinary leader, extraordinarily popular, and he has been just hugely effective in transforming El Salvador, particularly when it comes to the crime issue.
It's such an amazing story, and it really shows what can be done when you take an iron fist approach to crime, which was rampant in El Salvador. It was the homicide capital of the world just a few short years ago, the highest number of homicides per capita compared to anywhere else. And with his victory as the president in 2019, that's dropped 95%, 95%, and that's why he won re-election resoundingly, because this matters to people, that you can walk on the streets safely and not worry about that. And now he's also turned it into, I think, one of their largest exports, where he's running the prison cell so well, and it's this real hardcore prison that sends a message, and it's a massive deterrent to criminals. That now people are sending their own criminals to him because they've become experts at reducing crime and punishing criminals. The
stats are incredible. To go from one of the most dangerous places in the world to one of the safest, I think it's one of the safest in that region, or the safest, it's again, huge achievement. We've talked about Javier Milei before. He's been called the Argentinian Trump. He's been, again, hugely impactful in Argentina. We've talked about El Salvador, and now Ecuador has returned, again, a centre-right leader. There seems to be a bit of a right-wing resurgence in South America, Kosha.
For sure. I think, we've seen shades of it, of course, in Europe, which we've discussed for related and in some cases different reasons, and then in Latin America it's the same thing, the economy and cost of living and all of that, but on top of that, crime, because some of those countries are very, very crime-ridden, as we've just discussed. And so you run on those common sense platforms that we're going to take an iron fist approach to criminality, we're going to prosecute and hold people accountable to the fullest extent of the law, we're going to have sensible, logical economic policy, we're going to have a sensible, foreign policy in terms of how we partner with the U.S. and so on and so forth. You're going to win, and he did. And
there's also an alliance being formed between these countries and the US, and I think it's something Australia needs to take note of, because we've just, I think, taken for granted this very close relationship we've had with the US. And we know with Donald Trump, he hasn't taken kindly to some of the things our leaders have said about him. And there's other countries where they seem to be more on the same page value-wise with the Trump administration. Does that pose any sort of a threat to Australia's place with its closeness with America?
I think alliances change just because they've been a certain way for 100 years. It's hard to grapple and get our arms around that, but they do change. And also, as more and more of these countries are shifting to the right in terms of the leaders that they're electing, it'll be very interesting to see what happens here, what happens in Canada, and if you get more of the left retaining or staying in power. It just sounds like there's so much daylight then between how Trump views the world versus then. But Trump only has less than 4 years left, and so we don't know what's going to happen beyond that.
We don't, but the front runner at the moment, and yes, it's early days, is JD Vance, and JD Vance is Trump plus 20%. He's Trump, but even more staunch in this worldview. Now let's engage in a bit of hyperbole. We love a bit of hyperbole on this program, and it doesn't get more crazy than this. This is just ridiculous carry-on from some very rich, very famous ladies who have been lucky enough to go into space for a few minutes.
Got it? 1, 2, 3, taking up space! Tamir's in space!
The ladies there are singer Katy Perry, TV presenter Gayle King, you know, Oprah's bestie, civil rights activist Amanda Nguyen, former rocket scientist Aisha Bowe, and filmmaker Kerry-Anne Flynn, and soon-to-be wife of Jeff Bezos, Lauren Sanchez. They were all in Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin spacecraft there. Let's hear from Katy Perry, and try not to lose your dinner listening to this.
It is the highest high, and it is surrender to the unknown, trust, and this whole journey is not just about going to space. It's the training, it's the team, it's the whole thing. I couldn't recommend this experience more. This is like up there with all the, different tools that I've learned in my life, from meditation to the Hoffman process. This is up there because what you're doing is you're like really finding the love for yourself, because you got to trust in yourself on this journey, and then you're feeling the love when you come down, for sure, and you're feeling that strength. So I feel really connected to that strong divine feminine right now.
I warned you, it wasn't good. Lauren Sanchez was also reduced to tears by the experience.
6 women just did the same flight that he did.
Oh, I just want to keep hugging you.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
and I hope that more people get to see this, because I feel, I don't even know how much it's going to change me.
Kosha, am I being too jaded here? But I can't find inspiration in this. You've got some very rich, famous women who were selected because they're rich and famous, not because they've got any understanding of science or space or any particular passion for it. And we're supposed to be uplifted by this. I think this is just so completely unrelatable to the average person.
For sure. I think the cynic in me thinks that it was just a marketing strategy by Blue Origin, which is way far behind SpaceX and the commercial private space industry. And this is a way to get a lot of media and attention and hype, putting famous people with perfect hair like up in space for 2 minutes in that zero gravity environment. They are melodramatic. I think back to Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and the types of interviews they would have given back in the 60s after they accomplished what they did, and it would be much more understated than Katy Perry's.
The astronauts who were just rescued by SpaceX after, 8-9 months in space, when they were supposed to be only there for about a week, they had less carry on than what we just saw there. It looks like they've cured cancer.
So much more gracious. And also, I think it's a reflection of celebrity culture where it's so much navel gazing and narcissism, where it was about, her and Katy Perry's meditation and her inner love and all that, as opposed to thanking the engineers at Blue Origin. That might be more appropriate.
Exactly. A lot of unearned privilege on display there. Before you go, I'm interested on your take on the meeting President Trump had with Bill Maher, one of his biggest haters. He invited him for dinner. Let's hear what happened and why Bill Maher is now being called a traitor by many on the left.
Okay, as you know, 12 days ago I had dinner with President Trump, a dinner that was set up by my friend Kid Rock, because we share a belief that there's got to be something better than hurling insults from 3,000 miles away. I know as I say that, millions of liberal sphincters just tightened. Oh my God, Bill, are you going to say something nice about him? What I'm going to do is report exactly what happened. You decide what you think about it. And if that's not enough pure Trump hate for you, I don't give a Now, does Trump want respect? Of course, who doesn't? My friend said to me, what are you going to wear to the White House? I said, I don't know, but I'm not going to dress like Zelensky, I'll tell you that. I've had so many conversations with prominent people who are much less connected, people who don't look you in the eye, people who don't really listen because they just want to get to their next thing, people whose response to things you say just doesn't track, like, what? None of that with him. And he mostly steered the conversation to, what do you think about this? I know, your mind is blown, so's mine.
Kosha, what do you think of that?
This is a cultural milestone in the arc of Trump. He went from being a very popular person in rap songs and movie cameos to cultural kryptonite, orange man bad, Hitler reincarnate, and now to this. It really is just such a roller coaster and a full circle, I think, for him, and it's a watershed moment in the culture.
And we saw that with the UFC again on the weekend, where it wasn't just the UFC fighters who were flocking to him. There was gridiron players. Shaq O'Neal made a point of going and shaking his hand. So, yeah, there is this shift happening. Kosha Gator, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.